Episode number 91. Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC. As I said in the previous show, episode 90, I find that it works out nicely to replay some of our most popular shows. I've learned that there are listeners who sign on every month, and some just don't even know that they can go back and listen to all the shows. So just so you know, you can. This is show 91, and they start all the way back at show 1. So you can go back and listen to all the shows. It's all free, and you can listen whenever you want to. I would also like to have you join us for our All About Breastfeeding community Facebook group. And especially after you hear part 1 and part 2, I think you'll find a lot to talk about. And I would love to open up a conversation about this interview. And I am interested in hearing all of your thoughts. Enjoy the show.
Regret and guilt are two different things, and we can take the guilt away from mothers if we show them that they couldn't have done anything other than they did in the situation they were in the society they live in, and that for this to improve, that society has to change. Hospital practices have to change. Education of health professionals has to change. Ways societies employ women have to change. All of those things have to change.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. Episode number 46. This is part 2 to my interview with Maureen Minchin. We continue on with this amazing interview with Maureen, who is giving us a lot of information that you really won't find in too many other places. She is really helping us to understand about infant formula and its relationship with long-term health. She is doing a great job of educating us without being overly concerned about upsetting anyone. Maureen is very angry at what she was not told as a young mother and feeding her baby, and she is on a mission, even if it upsets the apple cart, to educate parents about infant feeding. She says that if educators had to worry about making parents feel guilty about many of the subjects we need to talk to them about, we would be missing out on very important information, and that would be negligent. Go ahead and take a listen. Maureen, that's what I wanted to talk about, because we all know that every parent, every mother wants to do the best for her child. And some are right on board. They really want to breastfeed. They want to provide their baby with all the milk they possibly can. But we also know that even under the best of circumstances, there are some mothers who just cannot make enough milk for their baby. Some mothers make way less than what their babies need, and they do need to supplement what they're able to provide with other milk.
Yes.
So talk to me a little bit about what you suggest parents can do if they wanted to avoid formula, what else can they do? And then after that, what else can they do?
At the present moment, there's not a lot they can do except try to work for social change. The current formulas from the best manufacturers are still the only relatively safe alternative to breast milk if you're unable to produce enough or access enough. And we don't know for how long it's critical that babies are exclusively breastfed. But you can make sure that they're exclusively breastfed while they're in hospital, because they need so little that, in fact, you can meet their needs. You can insist that the hospital provide donor human milk rather than formula. Those movements are starting already in various places. The Scandinavian paediatrician who stated in a symposium put out by an infant formula company that in Scandinavia we would consider it unethical to give preterm infants any artificial formula or anything but human milk, made it clear that it is possible in whole countries to make all the preterm babies fed only on human milk. It gets harder if you start scaling up to all the full-term babies as well. And, of course, it's just as important for them in the early days. Their lives may not depend on it in the way that preterm babies' lives do, but at the same time, we don't know what their genetic makeup is or how important it might be in this particular family for that child to be fully breastfed. How can mothers deal with that? There are ranges of possibilities with varying levels of risk in terms of finding other donors who will give you human milk. Many countries have had this available much more routinely than we had. I can even see wet nursing making a comeback as a profession, although that has complications too. But certainly what you find is that advantaged women are using networks to share milk with mothers who don't have enough. And that may or may not be possible for particular mothers. If it's not at all possible to get donor milk from anyone else, then you go back to saying, yes, you have to use infant formula, but continue to partially breastfeed, because even some breast milk will make a difference to the baby in relation to this. I think the major we have, however, is not what women want to do or what their bodies are capable of doing, but the way their lives are being organised by a society that doesn't think that being a mother matters and doesn't think that breast milk makes any difference to a child. Because we believe that formula is perfectly safe and adequate, we don't allow mothers the freedom to be at home with their children, to be able to breastfeed them as they need to. Now, if you're in a Scandinavian country, your job is protected, sometimes for years, so that you can go back to your job when you finish the important job of being a mother to your child in the first 12 months of life, for instance, or even in some cases 3 years. Parental leave schemes, we shouldn't be forcing mothers to go back to work in low-paying jobs where they then have to try and juggle expressing breast milk along with feeding babies. They have the worst of both worlds when they're forced into a situation like that. Certainly, again, advantaged women may do very well if they can get the nanny to bring the child along to be breastfed, for instance, which sometimes happens. But in point of fact, most mothers will find that the combination of working and expressing and having someone else care for their babies is just a nightmare, a real hassle. It can be done, and I applaud the women who manage to do it, but it's not a practical thing for many women as well. So, again, we've got formula.
Because I work with moms who are pumping all the time, and they're struggling to make enough milk, struggling to pump as frequently, and they're feeling guilt if they cannot keep up their supply. Yeah. And they're struggling with extreme and utter fatigue, trying to keep up with the home, with the work. And sometimes, I try to explain to moms, especially when they're struggling, our bodies were meant to, like you talked about from the beginning, to be with the babies. And while in modern day, some want to go back to work or need to go back to work, it's not the biological norm, and they are relying on a plastic pump to stimulate their breasts, to trick them into thinking they have a baby at the breast. And this is, they're not failing because they often feel like they're failing. And I explained to them that they're not failing. You are almost like working against a tide, relying on a pump to keep up the supply that you established when you were home. And so everything that you're saying is so right on the society that we've built around mothers and babies.
And that society is only possible because of infant formula. I remember being shocked. Back in 1984, I visited Washington and spoke to a senior scientist who was a doctor working at the Food and Drug Administration, the US FDA. And I was trying to put together lists of recalls of infant formula. And I asked her about these, and I said, well, she had actually plagiarized a report that had been done for the FDA and published it along with someone else under her own name. And she had listed all of these problems with, breastfeeding. One Californian B12 deficient mother who had a B12 deficient child by 12 months of age. And she didn't have these recalls that I'd found in the FDA library of infant formulas in America. So I said to her, when you wrote the article, you were very up to date on every last little problem that occurred to a single mother in America about breastfeeding, but you didn't have many of the recalls of infant formula. Why was that from the period up till 1984? And she said, oh, well, there were none between 1979 and 1984. And I said, well, I found 6 in the library just recently, your library here. I've been working here. I found 6 that weren't in your article. Did you not know about those? And she said, oh, you know about those. And I said, yes, I know about those. I said, well, so why did you leave them out? And she said, well, you have to understand, after the Chofri disaster in 1979, when babies were brain damaged because one change of formula actually took out something more than they had intended to, and you ended up with babies who were damaged intellectually. After the Chofri disaster, American parents were absolutely terrified about infant formula. We have to reassure them that American formula is safe because American society depends on bottle feeding. That's what she said to me. And I said, so you're saying that article, which was meant to be an independent scientific review, was actually not a review, but a piece of propaganda? And she said, oh, I didn't say that.
But you said I did.
I said, well, it is. It was politically motivated. You had made a prior decision that you couldn't include emotive counts of recalls because American society depends on bottle feeding. American society is capable of change. It's changed enormously. If we thought women's milk mattered the way that I believe it matters, American society would be changed in 20 minutes. You think about 1985, as I was going to see her, I was choking to death in airports on everybody else's cigarette smoke. It doesn't happen anymore, does it? Because we realised there were costs and damage was being done, and we changed our society to stop other people harming us. Now, I think it's time we started to do that about infant feeding because we are harming our children. We are not permitting them to be the optimum that they could be if they don't get breast milk. We don't know for how long it's essential. It may be that even 2 or 3 months of full breastfeeding, it's certainly a good start, is really helpful to normal gene expression. We do know, and there are studies that show that there's more DNA damage and chromosomal breaks. There are differences in white matter development in the brain. There's a whole heap of changes like that in the biology of children who are artificially fed compared with those who are breastfed. I'm alarmed by that, and I think the whole of society should be alarmed by that.
How do you talk to parents about what I feel is one of the most difficult conversations I need to have with parents who are giving their baby formula because they don't have any other choice? The last thing we want to do, we have this knowledge and we know where we need to go with it, but how do we talk to parents about the need to give as much human milk as possible, but if they can't, that big word GUILT comes into the conversation. How do you frame your conversations? I think
the only thing we can do is to be truly honest with them. And I've yet to find a mother. I have on occasion advised a mother who's gone too far down the track of milk suppression and who has absolutely no social support that she would need to think about relactating, all of those things. I've known women like that, and I've known that the child is allergic, and I've directed them straight to an appropriate infant formula that's less likely to do as much damage as another one. But I haven't not told them what the source of their problems is, because the fact of the matter is most of the babies who are artificially fed do end up being more difficult in terms of their guts are colonized with bacteria that shouldn't be there, that make them feel less comfortable in their own skins. They cry more. Crying is unknown in cultures where babies are carried and breastfed. You know, crying is a sign that a child needs attention, so it gets attention, so it stops crying. Inconsolable crying of the kind that we accept as normal in the West is actually quite abnormal, and we should really start rethinking. One of the problems about it is that at the time that people started talking about, let's research normal psychology of children and we'll do all of these studies and we'll test this and that, what were they looking at? They were looking at formula-fed babies. So, of course, the normal development of children, according to American textbooks, is what you get normally when you don't feed babies full breast milk all the time. So I tell parents, I'm as honest with parents as I possibly can be. I know exactly how distressing it is. I tell them my child too is a victim of formula at the age of 40, moving into autoimmune diseases. He is suffering because I didn't know what I should have known. He was the victim of my lack of knowledge. I feel terrible about that at times, but I also don't see it as my fault. I've done what I could in the context I was in. I did the best I could, and that's all any of us can do. But they need to know that formula may be behind many of the problems that their children develop, because if they don't know that formula's behind it, they blame themselves for that. They might,
right.
You've got an autistic child. You don't want to be told that just happened because, the genes were this way or that. You immediately then think, it was either me or it was him. The dad or mum did this to the child. If you can be shown that, in fact, environmental influences that you had no control over may be responsible for this, then, in fact, you feel bad that you couldn't protect your child from those influences, but you don't see it as inevitable. You don't feel doomed to have another such child if you have another baby. You've got some way of taking some of the guilt and the blame away from you. I deal with this all the time with allergy mothers, and they regret bitterly that their child was allowed to be exposed to formula in hospital, and they accept that it is the thing that has caused the problems that they've got. They don't feel guilty about that. Regret and guilt are two different things, and we can take the guilt away from mothers if we show them that they couldn't have done anything other than they did in the situation they were in the society they live in, and that for this to improve, that society has to change. Hospital practices have to change. Education of health professionals has to change. Ways societies employ women have to change. All of those things have to change. Until that happens, we are going to go on having casualties. There is no way around that, as I see it.
Right. So we have to not be afraid to shy away from giving good research-based information, because when we learn that information, then we can do better.
Yes.
Just like
if we don't tell the truth, then we are supporting the society that makes breastfeeding impossible. If we refuse, for all sorts of good reasons and also some cowardly ones as well, because it can get you into a lot of hot water telling the truth to parents. If you're an employee, you can find yourself being hauled over the coals by someone who says you shouldn't have said that.
Right.
If we deny parents the truth about what we know about infant feeding now, then in fact we're supporting the myth of formula equivalence, the myth that it is safe, that it does no harm. And in doing that, we are facilitating women stopping breastfeeding early. And in doing that, we are facilitating the early death of some women from reproductive cancers. So I say quite clearly that the people who go around talking about how really there isn't that much difference and it doesn't matter in a society like ours and what's a few IQ points, etc., they are responsible for damage to children, for deaths of children, and for deaths of mothers as well. And I don't think that is what they think they're doing as they go around saying we're trying to protect women's freedom to choose, etc. freedom to choose has to be based on accurate information, and that information is just not getting to parents because the PR machines of both government and industry don't really want parents to know the truth about infant feeding.
Can you answer one question in as simple terms as you possibly can? Because one of the things that I also struggle with is mothers who are not able to make enough milk for their babies. And some may only be able to produce a quarter of their baby's needs, a half. Mm-hmm. And how do I best explain to a mother what I know to be true, that it doesn't matter how much the quantity that you can give your baby. If your baby is 2 weeks old, don't stop breastfeeding or pumping your milk just because your baby needs 25 ounces of fluid and you're producing 3. Mm-hmm. I want them to know in very simplistic terms how important that 3 ounces a day that they can produce for their baby is.
I would agree entirely that it is important to go on breastfeeding for as long as you can. What I find actually helps them is really understanding the mechanisms of how milk is produced. And there are more women who manage to move themselves out of that category when they really understand the dynamics of frequent breast emptying and how that affects the production of milk and so forth and so on. A lot of the reasons why their production is limited are really avoidable ones. I'm sure you work through those with your clients and many of them go on to succeed. But again, the logic of formula feeding has pervaded breastfeeding. Intervals, amounts, all of these things are things that the formula companies put on. And I've had mothers who have been successfully breastfeeding, but because they think they're not giving their babies the amount they should, they're mothers who are pumping, they top it up with formula to the arbitrary amount that they think should be given according to the formula can. Babies don't need any particular number of ounces. We can't predict what number of ounces they actually need. Their bodies and their metabolisms are all different. And if they're growing well, then they're getting enough. But, the basic issue is there. So I've known mothers who, as I say, were topping up with formula quite unnecessarily, and in doing so, down-regulating their milk supply, because every ounce you give that's formula will actually be an ounce you don't make, even if, you try to pump. Because it's an issue that I remember one mother who was told to actually take her baby off the breast for 2 days, and she expressed only 750 mils of milk, and she was giving a litre of formula, and she then believed that what she had to do was to give another 250 mils of formula when she put her baby back to the breast. But 750 mils of breast milk is the equivalent of a litre of formula in terms of, the bioavailability and the nutritional capacity of the baby to absorb it. We could talk about that particular topic for an hour itself. I think a lot of women, the practices that they come up with to try and deal with it often end up down-regulating their capacity. But you can only actually work on these things in a certain context. If you've got absolutely no home support, no family nearby to help, a husband who isn't particularly helpful, a partner who's not interested in you going on and thinks that there's no reason why you shouldn't use formula because he was formula fed or she was formula fed and everybody's fine, then in fact you're not going to succeed and you will need formula. And I should go back to one thing that I talked about, the risks of deficiency and excess with formula by 4 months because body stores are exhausted, the in utero body stores are exhausted. I wasn't saying that all formula is deficient. We only find out about deficiencies over time and then they get remedied. It takes about 20 years from the time that they first identify the deficiency or excess to the time that it's actually in production. But I wouldn't want people to go away thinking that modern infant formula was so dangerous that they had to boycott it. It does have risks, but not all babies will actually be as badly affected by those risks as others. And every bit of breast milk you give, by widening the diet, by providing enzymes and hormones and all the rest, actually reduces the risk of formula feeding considerably. It helps the baby digest it. However, we do know that the gut bacteria of the mix-fed baby is much more like the gut bacteria of the formula-fed baby than it is like the gut of an exclusively breastfed baby. So there will be negatives to mixed feeding, but still, it's better than not breastfeeding at all.
taken a little break so I can share this info with you. I am really psyched to be able to share this next piece of news with you. My regular listeners are very familiar at this point with Momentum, the organization that I talk about on each show. You know the one that I say saved my life as a new mother, the organization that helped me find other mothers who were new at this whole mothering thing. They became my people. They helped me navigate that first year of motherhood and continued to mother me as I had more kids and my need for support through their toddler years and kindergarten years and elementary school years just kept being needed. I made lifelong friends and they were so helpful that I am doing all I can to continue to support the organization. I want Momentum to continue to thrive, and I want you, my All About Breastfeeding audience, to experience just some of what Momentum is all about. The ladies of Momentum have agreed to give my listeners a 14-day trial membership so you can see what this Mother Center thing is all about at no cost to you. Just hop on over to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/podcast. You will see a link from Momentum. It's in blue, and you just click it on and it will bring you to the page for you to sign up for your free trial. Honestly and truly, there's absolutely no cost to you. This is just a great opportunity for you to enjoy the discussion groups and the blogs and webinars and educational pieces that are available for free for you. I will have a link to this in the show notes. And now, back to the show.
And what would you say to a mother who is struggling? She is keeping her baby at the breast. She's using a supplemental nursing system, which is a bottle that we hang around your neck, attaches to a tube that the baby can get milk from that bottle and from her breast. And so she is struggling to keep her baby close to her, feed her baby at the breast. And again, she's still making a very small amount, but her breast tissue is such that she's just not able to make enough. And she's just crying about that.
So when I say I'd give her a hug, that might not be something that, would be totally professional, shall we say. But I would basically encourage her to do what she's doing. I'd give her a gold medal for the effort, the work that's involved. I'd reassure her that it is indeed worthwhile, but if it is getting to be too much, I would also say to her, only you can decide when enough is enough. And whatever you've done as much as you can. You know when that time comes. I'm not going to tell you when it comes, but I'm certainly not going to look down on you or criticize you or think you should have done more. You're the only one who can say when you have to simplify your life and get back to doing things. And, of course, once you get to, if you're talking to a mum who is doing this mostly formula feeding, by the time the child is 4 months, 4 to 6 months, you can start to widen the diet. I've had allergy cases, one from Singapore who consulted me, had seen every pediatrician on the island and still had a screaming 3-month-old baby who bottle refused to have anything out of the bottle until she was utterly, desperately hungry, whereupon she would drink it all down, swallow, fall asleep, exhausted, and wake up and start screaming again and go through the whole cycle all over again. And the father contacted me and I said, look, how would you feel if I told you that the only thing you were to eat was milk? He said, oh, God, it's terrible, heaty stuff. I'd never cope. And I said, well, maybe that's the message your 3-month-old child is giving you. Can you just go and talk? She's 3 months old now. She's survived that early neonatal phase. Is your mum there? And his mother was a great Nonya cook. What would your mother suggest as weaning food for the child who can't be fully breastfed and who's at this stage? And the Nonya mum came up with this chicken rice porridge, which was basically a really nice, rich food. And I said, well, you could try offering her some of that and see how she goes, because she needs to move on from formula to food and water. And being a Chinese baby, it just might be that Chinese foods will agree with her rather better than cow's milk does. So I did that. The child stopped screaming, developed an appetite, grew normally, was bright as a button, was fine. Now, I wouldn't recommend that under 3 months because, as I say, you've got all of these issues of what we might or might not have in a mixed diet. But certainly, I don't have problems with people actually giving babies food and drink. I do have problems with homemade formulas that try to do all of that sort of stuff because the ones I've seen on the internet don't seem to even observe the basics of hygiene apart from anything else, and are preparing large quantities. Babies need to move on to eat food and drink water, and it should be freshly prepared food, and it should be chemical-free water that they're eating. So, you can, by the time they're 3 months, you can keep them on formula, yes, but you can start to widen the diet by giving other useful complementary foods. And the World Health Organization has some excellent resources online about appropriate complementary foods. And again, that's discussed and referenced in that blog post that you can get to from my Facebook page.
I'm so glad I asked that question because you've really helped me to broaden my thinking. Now, I am not in a position to be able to give that kind of advice to a parent as a lactation consultant. I can certainly have them speak with their pediatrician about it, but or even I'm going to give them the show to listen to because I really like that line of thinking that you were saying, you know what, to the dad, well, like, how would you like if milk of any source was your only nutrition at this point? If you were unhappy with it, what else might you do? And that what else might you do might be to add something else to your diet. So you had them think about, well, and then go back culturally, what that child would be eating culturally. And so, again, I realize that this is not a template. This is not advice for every parent, but just to broaden the thinking about what we're doing with babies who are crying a lot and refusing to drink some of the formulas or enough of the formula, or they're drinking enough, but they're just miserable, that if they're if they're past the 3-month part and an otherwise healthy baby, that offering them some good quality pureed food might be helpful.
Yes. And if you've prepared it fresh yourself, you can know that it's organic, and if you can afford to buy organic, of course, I wouldn't have been able to. But you can know that it's good quality fresh food. You make it in small quantities. Don't go making heaps and dragging it out. The freshness is part of it. The whole basic safety of diet is variety and moderation. And once you get variety in, you don't have to worry so much about, are you missing a trace element one way or another? As long as you keep an eye on iron and zinc, which you can do as long as you've got red meats coming through, there won't be problems with that. Egg yolk is another good source of those sorts of iron and zinc, also of omega-3s. You've then got to do that within the context of what allergies the family has, as well as what cultural issues they might have. But the basic recipe, you might say, is, and this applies to a formula as well, it's a carbohydrate staple, a protein source, quality fats, green and yellow and coloured veg, for all of the antioxidants and vitamins and minerals. And if you have that kind of working framework in your head, you don't need to do that every single day. That needs to be the diet overall. But diet overall doesn't mean every single meal has to have every bit of it in all the time. And if you start doing that, you can actually find resources through WHO where they've got culturally appropriate foods sourced from, millet is the carbohydrate staple in one place, rice is a carbohydrate staple in another. So you get chicken rice porridge in Asia, but you'd get a sorghum porridge somewhere else. Those are the kinds of things that if we stop thinking about it as we have to have this magic product, you can actually increase the variety and the interest. You can then use formula just as a backup source of a drink.
Right. That's very interesting. What I want to do now is, we're coming to a close. There's been just so much fabulous information. I really want you to be able to summarize your book again for us and tell us what the new parent, soon-to-be parent, and parent can really extrapolate from your trilogy that would be most helpful for them, and where they can find your book.
Well, it's available through Amazon and Book Depository. In America, Amazon is probably the easiest way to go because you get free postage, but it's not necessarily the cheapest. It's worth looking at Book Depository, which provides free postage around the world as well. And there are various groups that are also selling it in countries like Great Britain. La Leche League, Great Britain, they've been selling it, as has Lactation Consultants of Great Britain. It can be ordered that way too, but Amazon and Book Depository are probably the best. What does it say? The book it's a huge thing. It weighs nearly 2 kilograms, and because it's so big, what I've tried to do is to put together science, history, and clinical practice in one book, because the scientists don't know how it's affecting the children at the other end. The parents don't know the science that explains why their children are affected like this, and nobody knows what infant formula history really is. We have this sort of mythology of the perfect mix of science and love, as Wyeth were brave enough and cheeky enough and misleading enough to actually say on many of their cans. The perfect mix of science and love is their advertising slogan. It isn't a perfect mix, and there is quite a bit of science behind it, but the science is always, kind of the science that's in the tin is always about 10 years behind the science that the scientists are discovering via the research that the companies fund. Love is something that may well go into it, and a mother who formula feeds can, just as easily as a mother who breastfeeds, give her baby skin-to-skin contact, make sure that she actually provides lots of physical contact with the baby while she's feeding, and not allow the baby just to self-feed and to see the gratification of food as being the thing that matters, when really it's the relationship that is fundamentally important in feeding.
And I love that you say that too. That's something that's so important. I talk about it all the time, but I find that it's really not talked about much at all, that relationship that people are building with mothers that are holding their baby close, talking, tactile, smell. There's so much more to it, right?
That's right. And I've known mothers who bottle fed just like that. And it does build the relationship between the mother and the child. Now, I really admire mothers who can do that, because they need that more than the breastfeeding mother. The breastfeeding mother is automatically primed by her hormones. Her biology is helping her to be a good mother. And as I say, I think it taught me to be a mother, actually, that whole process. The formula feeding mother could easily make her baby disposable, hand her baby off to other people, become more detached. And some women value bottle feeding for precisely that reason. They don't want to be too close to their children. They're afraid of that kind of intimacy that can develop. That again, I feel sorry for their babies, but, that again is a choice that women can make. However, I do think that the woman who does do that, works hard at it, who is formula feeding, really to be admired, because it isn't as easy for her to be that kind of good, attentive mother, because she's not being helped by her biology. If she does that, she's giving herself the best chance she can. Yes, I think it's really important to say to mothers, let's not overdo the closeness thing, because if you work at it, you can build the closeness yourself by making sure you get plenty of skin contact. And breastfeeding mothers don't have a monopoly on loving their children by any means.
Even if we're feeding babies our milk in a bottle, we really have to pay attention to skin to skin, holding them close, not passing our babies off to too many people too frequently, especially in the beginning.
That's right.
Thank you for that. So tell us how we can get in touch with you, your contact information.
Okay, I didn't summarize the book. Let me just quickly summarize the argument of the book. Like, the three things are there: science, history, and clinical practice. But the science argues that instead of talking about, everyone talks about the hygiene hypothesis. Everybody's heard about that. What I'm arguing in the book is that we should be talking about the milk hypothesis, that it makes much more sense to think of milk as the factor that determines how our health and our immunity and all the rest of it develops. There's really much more evidence for that than there is for the idea that, taking your baby to feed, someone said breastfeed your baby in a cowshed. It's the breastfeeding that'll be protecting the baby, in fact, in that situation. The biodiversity hypothesis has come up, sort of saying we're suffering from a lack of exposure to natural things in the environment. And there's undoubtedly some truth in that and in the hygiene aspect of it. But you have to step back and think about milk. Milk is the substance that actually is designed, has evolved over millennia to present the baby with traces of everything in the environment that the mother and the child are in in some form or other, and in a manageable form, along with all of the other ingredients that enable that child to cope with it. So through milk, babies are exposed to what the mother eats, to what she breathes, to what the baby is exposed to. If the mother has a baby in childcare, she should always, when she brings that baby home, suck its fingers. Now, it might mean, and nuzzle and kiss it in order to collect the germs that the baby has been exposed to, because she alone, of all the people in the world, can actually produce the vaccination that child needs right there and then against the bugs that were in the environment. Her body will manufacture protective substances against anything that is a pathogen in that environment. The baby experiences all the tastes and flavours of the mother's food, and so is much more willing to eat other foods than the formula-fed child who's been on a bland mono diet since birth. There's whole heaps of ways in which breast milk is the message. It's basically the bridge between the womb and the world. The baby goes from the womb. It has to progress to independence in the world. Breast milk presents the world to the baby in all sorts of ways that educate its immune system to be able to deal with it effectively. And that's what we've been missing and messing up by the way that we have messed up with past generations, because each generation passes on that microbiological flora and the history that it's had. And if that formula is intervened in that history, then the way that the breastfeeding mother now will be different because of formula in the past. So I see it as the artificial feeding revolution of the 19th to 20th century actually has created compounding intergenerational damage, that things get worse as you go on, so that, you might lose a few IQ points. You end up with an epidemic of autism and of what we're seeing as minimal brain damage children one way and another. We should be looking at it in relation to just about every disease that is current in the Western world. And we should be looking to it for remedies for all of our diseases as well. There's a lovely story in the book about a Norwegian child that was at risk. They'd exhausted every antibiotic under the sun to try and deal with this resistant bacteria the kid had. The pediatrician, who was an IBCLC, thought to herself, well, wait a minute, this particular bug is rare in Norway, but it's quite common in some of the migrant cultures in the countries they come from. She went and she got breast milk from nursing mothers from that community, fed the child recovered. And we know that breast milk actually brings back the sensitivity of pathogens that are multiply resistant. It makes them, once again, sensitive to antibiotics. So that was probably the impact of that particular dose of breast milk in that case. It certainly cured the child. We should be thinking of it as a resource where we can harvest stem cells without actually harming embryo or cheating children of cord blood. Its milk can provide many future options, and all of them are being investigated and resourced by formula companies and by pharmaceutical companies, but mothers are just doing it, and they don't realize just how valuable what they're doing really is. So the book is arguing there is no substitute for breast milk. It is fundamental to the health of populations. It's fundamental to their intellectual development. And we need, therefore, to structure society around the capacity of women to breastfeed. And we need, if we're getting epidemics of women with not enough glandular tissue, we need to identify what is causing that and fix it, because it's not true biologically of most populations around the world. The breast, generally speaking, has more than enough tissue to feed one child. In fact, since women have two breasts, most women are capable of feeding twins, and in fact many have fed triplets and quads, in fact, quite successfully to 3 months. So how important is breast milk? I don't think we can even begin to understand it as yet. To me, the book's title, Milk Matters, is what I want people to get the message from the book. So how can they contact me? If they go and look for me on Facebook, they'll probably find me without too much trouble, or just do an internet search. I do have a blog. The website is www.nbsp, Infant Feeding Matters, all one word and all lowercase, infantfeedingmatters.com. And that's where many of the posts that I've referred to will be found. I'm quite happy to deal with queries, but of course there's a limit to how many I can get through at any given time. But, you know, I'm on lots of Facebook pages and can be found without too much difficulty. But the book really is where to start, because while it's expensive, it is actually downloading 40 years of knowledge, and it's got all the references you'll need. And I'll be referring you to it simply because I will no longer remember as much as I should when dealing with these things very shortly. And having got it down on paper, I feel right, you know, now I can relax.
I like the way that you put it, that especially for the current population of mothers, that basically you've downloaded 40 years of information. That's fabulous.
Yeah, well, I've tried to download my brain because when I've been teaching, I've taught courses to health professionals for decades, and when I've been teaching, I've said, oh, God, I wish I could download your brain. And I said, well, I'm doing my best.
Well, Maureen, I'm going to say to you, I really, really appreciate all this 40 years of information. And we both know that probably every sentence that you shared with us could be made into an hour discussion alone. You've done a fabulous job of being able to be concise with the information that I really wanted to be able to share with my listeners today, which was how important breast milk is, and that it is a public health issue. It is something we really should be having in the forefront of our brain. And most importantly, that we need to build a society that will help support mothers in their breastfeeding efforts. Our current modern society makes it very, very difficult for some mothers to do the very best that they want to do. And I also wanted to close in saying that you're not saying that formula is the cause of all ills. It's not the only cause of autism and other issues with children. Because I think that sometimes, you know, people, again, who feel guilty, they pick out that part. And what we're really doing is what you're saying is to be educating the population, educating people, because that education gives us power, gives us knowledge, and knowledge is power for us to move forward and make the best decisions that we possibly can as mothers for our children. To me, that's what this interview is really all about, is being able to share really good, excellent information that you've downloaded over the last 40 years, to not hide information, to not sweep it under the covers, and to be able to be really forthfront and forthright with this information, again, to give parents the power to be able to make good decisions, right?
Absolutely. I think it's patronizing, and it enrages me when I hear people saying, oh, but I couldn't tell the mother that, could I? You can tell the mother anything. She wants the truth about this, and knowledge is power. She can do something when she understands what caused it. To flail around not knowing what's caused your problems is just a nightmare country. Could you fix it? Can you fix it? If you understand how powerful that early feeding experience is, you'll know that some damage that's been done has been done. Yes, I lived with that for 40 years with my son, and it went through hospitalizations and all sorts of horrible things along the way, and a lot of medical disbelief, and we'll probably still be facing that till the day we die. But he is a lot healthier for knowing the causes than he could ever have been if I had just said, oh, look, I'm not going to confront those issues. It's all too painful. They are painful, and I really respect any mother who has to deal with these. God knows, I think formula feeding mothers deserve a gold medal, not the ones who choose because they think it's more convenient for them, but they're such a tiny minority. However loudly they talk, they do not represent the vast majority of women who try their best and fail at breastfeeding and then feel terrible about it. And that just breaks me. I wish I could reach all those mothers and say, look, it's not your fault. For God's sake, it's not your fault.
Right. And we're constantly, you know, with this issue, how we feed our babies, but with other healthcare issues, we're constantly learning and we're constantly evolving and we're constantly changing to make things better. Maureen, I appreciate you very much. I'm going to say goodbye to you. And I know I don't know, it's something like probably 2 or 2:30 in the morning for you.
3 a.m.
2 a.m. So
3.
And we said you're a night owl, but leaving you at 3 a.m., you've certainly done your absolute best and been very, very nice to me and to my audience. And I want to leave this interview by saying that I appreciate your body of knowledge and the time that you've given us today. Thank you so much, Maureen.
Thank you for inviting me.
That's it, All About Breastfeeding listeners. That was a really heavy but very educational interview, and I am glad that you listened to both part 1 and part 2. Any references that Maureen made and a link to her book will all be in show notes. So just go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/Maureen_Minchin, Minchin. See you next time.